A terrible tragedy occurred in Alyona's life, for which she felt guilty and realized that she would have to pay for what she had done for the rest of her life. Alyonka fell in love with 15-year-old Valerka, a young man from a modest family who was said to have little promise. She accepted with pleasure his attention, happy bouquets, small gifts, and other manifestations of his care. Valerka put her on a pedestal, was ready to do everything for her. Over time, Valerka entered a technical school as a welder, and Alyona entered the institute and went to a neighboring city, which was the regional center. Every Saturday, Valerka came to see her. They spent long hours together, and he accompanied her home, hurrying back to his town, hitchhiking. This routine continued for 2 years. All this time, Elena hid from Valerka her feelings for another, Artem, a rich and cocky young man who was the object of all the girls' attention. "Alenka, why are you so closed? We live in another century," Artem would say to her, and she would feel embarrassed and blush. Perhaps this is what attracted Artem, and he decided to turn his attention to this girl. For a long time she resisted, but eventually she gave in and started dating Artem, wallowing in her happiness. Valerka did not suspect anything and continued to come to her on Saturdays, bringing small gifts and thinking that Alyona will always be his bride. Once Artem invited Alyona to his birthday party and said that there would be only close friends, celebrating the holiday at the dacha, surrounded by nature and the river. Elena prepared for this event for a whole week, and when Artem came to pick her up, she waited for him in front of the entrance. However, as soon as they left, Valerka came to her house and waited for her. Elena spent the whole evening having fun, and at night she began to belong to Artem, who was proud of his success in conquering an unavailable girl. The next morning, when Artem drove her home, Elena saw on the bench a bouquet of her favorite daisies and a small basket with fragrant strawberries. At that moment, disappointment seized her, and she remembered that yesterday was Saturday, and Valerka, faithful and devoted, was waiting for her here. Alyona cried in frustration at herself, but the next Saturday she went to see Artem again. Leaving Valerka alone, she soon realized that she was pregnant, and together with Artem she began to wonder about her future. "Artem, what should we do?" she asked him, and he, dumbfounded, not knowing what to answer, replied, "I don't know. I guess we'll have to get married. My father holds too high a position for me to afford to spoil his reputation. So I will make the decision to have a child." "Artem, I'm afraid," she said. "Don't worry. Everything will be fine. We'll have to deal with it sooner or later," Artem reassured her. "So, what's been going on with you these past Saturdays? Who's that guy who's been coming to see you?" asked Artem. "That's Valera, my friend. We grew up together." She replied. "I see. Then don't forget to invite him to our wedding," suggested Artem. However, Alyona was afraid to tell Valera the truth, and he hadn't shown up at her place in 3 weeks. She began to think that he was offended, or perhaps he had found another girl, and that made her situation a little easier. But the following Friday, while waiting for Artem at the entrance, she was surprised when Valera approached her. "Hi," he said quietly. "Valera, I wasn't expecting you." She replied, "I realized you've changed a lot, Alyona. Became different somehow," Valera said, looking at her with his tired eyes. Then he took her hand, which was hanging aimlessly, and said, "Alyona, I have something to tell you." Whoops. Suddenly came Artem's voice. "What do you have going on here?" "Artem, this is Valera is my friend," Elena began to explain. "Ah, so it's you." "Valera is just a friend," smiled Artem. "Well, Valera, come to our wedding tomorrow. It'll be at the Amadeus restaurant, free admission. Formal wear. Alyona, let's go." "We don't have time, by the way. She's pregnant. You didn't know." "Congratulate me. I'm going to be a father soon." "Well, that's such an event, isn't it? So, are you coming?" Artem asked. Valera turned very pale and, without looking at Elena, nodded. He seemed embarrassed by the rudeness with which Artem spoke. When he took Alyona's hand and led her to the car, she followed him, seeming to feel submissive. The next day she became Artem's wife, and the wedding was in full swing. Among the guests she noticed a gray slouching figure. "Valera, that meant He had come after all, but why? Artem suddenly approached the musicians, quickly said something to them, took the microphone, and, congratulating the newlyweds, began to sing. His clear and deep voice, despite his unkempt appearance, amazed everyone. The noise and clamor subsided, and he sang a song from an old movie, And in the Starry Night, and in the Light of Day. Don't leave me, don't leave me. Let everything disappear and my friends go away. Don't leave me, I can't do without you. Elena looked at him with all her eyes and realized that Valera could sing so beautifully. But her thoughts were not about music. Now she realized that she had lost her truest love, and no one else would love her the way Valerka loved her. After he finished singing, he left without approaching her or staying at the wedding. He had said all he wanted to say. 3 months passed. Alyona was taking the pregnancy hard, and Artem did nothing to ease her suffering. Immediately after the wedding, he returned to his usual lifestyle, and he spent evenings and nights out of the house, paying no attention to his young wife. Artem, what's going on? Why are you acting like this? She asked. What's the complaint? He replied, I don't know you anything. I married to hide your shame. What more do you want? Have the baby, take care of the child, and don't interfere with my life. Understand. You'll have enough of me providing for you and the future child, Artem said, raising his voice. That's it. I've fulfilled my duties. The more has done his job, the more can leave. And anyway, when you were in bed with me, what did you count on? If you hadn't gotten pregnant, I would have left you because as a lover, you're nothing. He walked out, slamming the door, and Elena sat down, crying, blaming herself for being stupid and gullible. The next day she began to feel ill, and she was put on retainer. One early morning she excused herself for an hour and came home to get some things. When she opened the door, she saw that there were men's and women's clothes scattered all over the apartment, and Artem and a strange girl sleeping in her bed, completely undressed and naked. Elena screamed and felt a sharp pain in her stomach. Slowly settling on the floor, she no longer saw the 2 men running frighteningly around the room. Alyona spent a week in the hospital, turning her back on everyone and not wanting to see anyone. Artem came to see her only once to bring her divorce papers for her signature. A few days later, Alyona returned to her town to stay home and calm her anxiety. She really wanted to see Valera and apologize to him, beg for forgiveness, and tell him that she had already been punished for everything. Her mother, seeing her daughter, exclaimed and hugged her. My girl, what has happened? This scoundrel has done what? Elena cried in her mother's arms, and only after a few days was able to clean herself up and tell her mother that she was going for a walk. Maybe I'll meet Valera, she suggested. Don't go, daughter. Leave the past in the past, the mother replied, but agreed to reassure her daughter. However, after leaving the entrance, Alyona headed to the neighborhood where Valera lived in a private house. Soon she came to his house and entered through a familiar wicket. She called out his name, but got no response. She asked again, but no one answered. Instead, Valera's mother, Antonina, came out of the room. Why have you come? She asked, looking at Alyona with an unseeing gaze. It's all your fault. Only you. Get out of here. Alyona ran outside and ran into Antonina's neighbor. What's going on here? The neighbor asked coldly. Recognizing Alyona, then she shook her head and said, You'd better go away, girl. Leave what was in the past, but Valera was gone. He was hit by a car and couldn't survive the trauma. He told his mother one last time that he would go to Alyona's wedding to say goodbye to her. His mother begged him not to go, but he couldn't say no to Elena. He was on his way home when he was hit by a car, and he left this life on the very day that Elena's wedding was taking place. 10 years passed. Alyona graduated from the institute and went to work in another region. She became a teacher and devoted herself to working with children. She had no family of her own and left behind trying to establish relationships with other adults. One day, however, a boy named Nikita Nyezev came to her class. This new boy immediately caught her attention with his modesty and kindness. Elena felt that she wanted to help him. The teacher took him under her wing. She had a strange sense of responsibility for the boy who clearly needed support. Alyona learned that Nikita lived with his father and they were going through difficult financial times. The boy always wore old and modest clothes and pocket money was rare. She decided to visit their home to see how she could help the family. She and Nikita did so together, and she learned that they rent a room in the family dormitory near the hospital. Nikita's father often travels for injections as he is in a wheelchair, and when Alyona arrived at their home, she was amazed at what she saw. The man who met her was in a wheelchair, but this man was Valera, her Valera. She exclaimed and rushed to him, hugging him, sobbing with joy that he was alive. Valera listened to Elena in silence and then told her of his fate. Ending up in the hospital after being hit by a car, Valera spent several months in a coma and miraculously survived. The man who hit him turned out to be rich and paid for his treatment, but Valera never fully recovered. While he was in the hospital, one nurse, thinking he was rich, began caring for him and eventually became pregnant. However, she left them when little Nikita was only a few months old. Valera and Nikita moved to a new city where they could afford a place near a good hospital, but they did not have enough money for a larger place. Alyona learned the whole truth about Valera's past and decided to help. She arranged for Valera's treatment, opened an account in his name, and did everything she could to improve their lives. A few years later, she came to the wedding proud and happy next to Valera and their son Nikita, who was rolling a stroller with his little sister in front of him. Alyona was no longer sad and laughed, knowing that she had done everything possible to correct her mistakes and bring happiness back. To Valera,